3 boys. No adult. Just the hum of a hospital lobby that didn't care they were there. The youngest one, Pharaoh, stood between his brothers like he was trying to hold them together with his body alone. His sneakers had a hole near the left toe. His shirt was 2 sizes too big. He kept pulling the collar up, then letting it fall, then pulling it again. Like if he kept his hands busy with something small, the large thing, the enormous, suffocating thing, might not land on him all at once. Nobody noticed. That was the thing. Nobody in that lobby. Not the woman behind the reception desk with the blue headset. Not the orderly rolling the empty wheelchair past the vending machine. Not the couple arguing in low voices near the elevator doors. Not the man reading the newspaper in the far corner who hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. None of them looked twice. 3 boys. Alone. In the middle of a hospital. And the world just kept moving. The middle brother, Ezekiel, sat in the plastic chair closest to the wall with his back pressed flat against it. His knees were pressed together. His hands were flat on his thighs. He had the posture of someone who had learned, young, way too young, that taking up less space made things easier. That being small and still and unremarkable was a form of protection. He was watching the double doors at the end of the hall. The ones marked restricted access in bold red letters. The ones that had a small square window at eye level, dark glass showing nothing. The ones that hadn't opened in over an hour. The oldest, Malachi, didn't sit. He stood, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes doing a slow, deliberate sweep of the lobby, the exits, the desk, the hallways, the people, like he was the one responsible for everything. The boys, the building, the whole broken situation they were standing in the middle of. He was 7 years old and already carrying the weight of a man twice his age. You could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way his chin stayed level, the way he breathed slow, measured, deliberate, like even the air was a resource he had to manage carefully because there might not be enough of it. Their mother was behind those doors. That's all they knew. She'd collapsed before she could say more, before she could write it down, before she could do the thing she always did. Reach for the small notepad she kept folded in her pocket, and explain it the way she explained everything. She was gone before any of that. And the paramedics had come and the neighbors had called and the boys had ridden in the back of a car with a woman from the building whose name they didn't know. And now here they were. In a lobby that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, waiting for someone to tell them something. The man in the dark suit sat 3 chairs down from Ezekiel. He hadn't moved in 40 minutes. His phone was in his hand, but the screen was dark. His name was Caius Aldridge, 41 years old, broad through the shoulders, the kind of face that didn't give information away without deciding to. Sharp jaw, quiet eyes, the stillness of someone who had spent a long time learning not to react in real time. He was there for a board meeting on the 3rd floor, had come down to get coffee from the machine near the entrance, had gotten the coffee, had not gone back upstairs. He didn't know why, not yet. He just kept watching the 3 boys, not staring, watching, the way you watch something that doesn't add up. The way your eyes return to a detail that your brain hasn't finished processing. Pharaoh pulled his collar up again. Then he turned, looked directly at Caius, held eye contact for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Longer than any interaction between a small child and a stranger in a public space had a right to last. There was nothing afraid in the look. That was the thing that caught Caius off guard. The boy looked at him the way someone looks at a door they're deciding whether to try. Then the smallest boy, voice barely above the hum of the lobby, barely above the ambient noise of the fluorescent lights and the distant beeping of machines down the hall, whispered 6 words. "Can we sit with you, mister?" Caius didn't answer immediately, and in that silence, that long, heavy, ordinary silence, something shifted, something too quiet to name, but real enough to feel. Hi viewers, have you ever been somewhere public and noticed a child alone, and felt that pull in your chest, that question, do I step in, or do I walk away? Leave your answer in the comments right now. What would you have done? Nobody moved. Caius looked at the boy. The boy looked back. Pharaoh's chin was lifted. His small hands were at his sides. Not fisted, not reaching, just open. Waiting. And the thing that happened next, the thing that started everything, that set every other thing in motion, it wasn't dramatic. There was no speech, no sweeping gesture, no sound that the rest of the lobby could have heard. Just a pause. Long. Waited. And in that pause, 3 boys stood at the edge of something and waited to find out if a stranger would leave them there. Again. The boys didn't move closer right away. They waited. Like they'd been trained to buy 100 small disappointments. Like they'd learned, early and permanently, the difference between someone who looked like they might help and someone who actually would. That gap, that distance between the look and the action had cost them before. Caius Aldridge didn't wave them over. Didn't soften his expression into something artificially warm. Didn't do the thing most adults do when they want a child to feel safe but are really just managing their own discomfort. The exaggerated smile, the crouch, the performative welcome. He didn't do any of that. He just stayed still. And somehow, in the specific and exhausted language of 3 boys who had become experts at reading adults, still was the right answer. Ezekiel moved first. Not a rush, a slide. Slow and quiet, like water finding a lower level. He crossed the few feet between his chair and the empty one beside Caius, and he sat down. Didn't speak. Didn't make eye contact. Just sat, with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes aimed at the floor. Like sitting was a neutral act that didn't need to mean anything yet. Pharaoh came next. Pressed himself close to Ezekiel's side. Shoulder to shoulder. The way the 2 of them had probably slept. The way children who have learned that physical closeness is the only reliable warmth arrange themselves without thinking about it. Malachi didn't sit. He moved 3 steps closer and stopped. Arms still crossed. Body angled so he could see both the restricted access doors and the man in the suit at the same time. He wasn't joining. He was repositioning. Still on guard. Still the one who watched. Caius let all of this happen without comment. He was good at reading rooms. He'd spent 2 decades in spaces where the truth of a situation lived underneath the official version of it. Boardrooms, courtrooms, negotiations where every word was chosen for what it obscured rather than what it revealed. He'd gotten good at finding the real story in the way people held themselves, in what they didn't say, in where their eyes went when they thought no one was watching. These boys were telling him everything. Pharaoh had a bruise on the inside of his left arm. Faded to yellow-green at the edges, old enough to be past the worst of it, recent enough to still be there. The kind of mark that could explain itself a dozen different ways. Tumble, a grabbed arm, contact with something hard and fast. Caius noted it the way he noted things, silently, without reaction, storing it somewhere he would come back to. Ezekiel's left, I had an irregularity at the outer corner, a slight heaviness. The residue of swelling that had come down but left its record behind the way all swelling does, in the texture of the skin, in the way the lid moved. His knuckles, 3 of them on the right hand, had small crescent-shaped cuts. Not the knuckles of a fighter. The knuckles of someone who had flinched into something with force, a wall, a floor, a surface that didn't give. Malachi had nothing visible. That was the detail that stayed with Caius longest. Because the ones who'd gotten good at making sure nothing showed, those were never the ones who had it easiest. Those were the ones who'd been at it long enough to learn the skill of invisibility. Long enough to know exactly which bruises went where a collar would cover them. Caius set his phone face down on his knee. A nurse came through the lobby's main set of doors. Moving fast, clipboard pressed to her chest, cutting a diagonal line through the space between the chairs like the chairs were furniture and the people in them were furniture too. She passed within arm's reach of the 3 boys and didn't break stride. Didn't drop her eyes. Didn't register them. Gone. Caius watched the space she'd walked through, then looked back at Pharaoh. The boy had been watching the nurse's back as she retreated. His expression, visible for 1 second before he caught it and smoothed it back to neutral, was not what Caius expected to see on a child's face. It wasn't hurt. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't even sadness. It was recognition. The flat, settled recognition of someone who had already made peace with not being seen, who had stopped filing it under injustice and started filing it under normal. That expression on a face that small, it did something to Caius that he wasn't prepared for. It sat in him like a stone dropped in still water, and the rings from it moved outward and didn't stop. He turned his phone over in his hand. The meeting on the 3rd floor had been running for 13 minutes. 12 people around a table. His chair empty. His phone full of messages he hadn't opened. He hadn't moved. Down the hall, the restricted access doors held their silence. And somewhere behind them, 3 boys' mother lay in a room she hadn't chosen, connected to things she couldn't control, unable to call out, unable to ask, unable to do the single thing she had organized her entire existence around doing. Protect them. Caius looked at the boys one more time. Malachi had finally turned away from the restricted doors. For the first time in over an hour, he wasn't watching them. He was watching Caius, measuring, deciding, his eyes steady and too old. Then, at the far end of the corridor, a second figure emerged. Another nurse, clipboard. But this one moved differently, slower. Her head was up and moving, scanning the lobby with intention, like she was looking for something specific rather than moving through space on the way to somewhere else. Her eyes swept the room and stopped on the boys. The nurse's name tag said Delphine in small black letters above a faded hospital logo. She had a pen behind her ear and a lanyard with too many badges on it that clicked softly together when she walked. Her face was professional, not unkind, but sealed. The look of someone who had learned to separate what she felt from what the job required, and had been doing it long enough that the seam between those two things had almost disappeared. She scanned the lobby, found the boys, walked toward them with her clipboard already raised. Malachi's shoulders went back. Pharaoh pressed flat against Ezekiel's arm. Ezekiel stopped breathing in the quiet, controlled way that meant he was managing himself. Managing what his face showed, what his hands did, how much of whatever he was feeling got out into the air. The nurse stopped in front of them. She looked at the clipboard, then at the boys, then back at the clipboard. The rhythm of someone working off a checklist, confirming a match. "You're the Delaney children?" Silence. She looked up. Her eyes found Malachi, the oldest, the one standing, the one who looked most like he might answer. "Your mother's name is Renata Delaney?" "Yes, ma'am." Malachi's voice was steady, flat, the voice of someone who had learned to talk to officials. "She's stable." The word came out clean and informational. No softness wrapped around it, no pause before it. Nothing that suggested she understood what those 2 syllables were doing to the boys hearing them. "She's resting. A doctor will come down shortly and speak to—" She looked around them, at the empty chairs beside them, at the empty space where a parent or relative should have been. "Someone, is there a family member we can contact? Grandmother? Aunt?" Silence. Then Malachi said, "No." One word. Final. He said it the way you say the end of a sentence when there is no more sentence. The nurse made a mark on her clipboard. The pen scratched the paper, and the sound of it, that small, administrative, indifferent scratch, was somehow the loudest thing that had happened in the last hour. "All right," she said. "We'll need to follow up on next of kin documentation." She said it like she was reading from a manual, like it was a logistical note, a procedural reminder, a box that needed ticking before the next part of the process. Like it wasn't. To 3 boys sitting alone in plastic chairs without a single adult in the world who'd come for them. Like it wasn't the sound of a floor beginning to give way. She turned and walked back through the doors. That was it. The whole conversation. Beginning, middle, end. 30 seconds. a mark on a clipboard and a sentence about documentation. Pharaoh made a sound. Small, compressed, not quite crying. Not the open kind of crying, not the kind with tears streaming down, but something tighter and quieter than that, something that lived in the throat instead of the eyes. He turned his face into Ezekiel's shoulder, pressed it there, and went still. Ezekiel's arm came around him without him looking, without him pausing. The way you do a thing you've done 1,000 times, automatically, completely, with your whole body understanding the need before your mind has finished identifying it. Caius sat with all of this. He didn't look away. He didn't pretend to be on his phone. He watched the three boys absorb what the nurse had said, watched them process it in the ways they each process things. Pharaoh, through his body, pressed small and quiet against his brother. Ezekiel through stillness and the slow return of his breathing to something measured. Malachi through the jaw that set itself and the hands that folded in his lap and the deliberate lowering of his body into the chair beside his brother's, slowly, with the kind of careful control that old pain produces. Caius had grown up in a house where the official language was also used to manage people, where words like arrangements and circumstances and will follow up were how the adults signaled that a decision had already been made about your life, and your participation in it was not required. He knew what those words felt like when they landed. He knew the specific hollow they carved. He said, quietly, not loudly, not making a show of it, "Stable means she's okay right now." Malachi didn't look up. "I know what stable means." "I know you do." Silence. Then Ezekiel, eyes still aimed at the floor, said, "She can't talk. She never could. But she always knows what we're saying." He said it the way you say something so fundamentally true that it stopped feeling like information and started feeling like geography, like a fact about the physical world. She can't talk. She always knows what we're saying. Both equally true, both equally real. Nothing in his voice asking for sympathy. Caius held that for a moment. A woman who couldn't speak, navigating hospitals, insurance forms, intake procedures, emergency rooms where the first thing they asked was, "Can you describe your symptoms?" A world designed entirely around the assumption that people could speak for themselves. Navigating all of it, alone, with three small boys waiting. "That means she's stronger than most people," Caius said. Ezekiel lifted his head, really looked at him. For the first time, fully, directly, like he was actually trying to see who was sitting there. The boy had careful eyes, dark and precise and full of things being organized quietly behind them. "Yeah," Ezekiel said after a pause. "She is." Pharaoh, still pressed to Ezekiel's shoulder, extended one hand. Slowly, palm up, open, not grabbing at anything, not demanding anything, just reaching the way a person reaches when they're not sure help is available but they've decided to ask anyway. Caius looked at that hand, small, chapped at the knuckles, the nails bitten short. He reached over and placed his own hand flat on the armrest between them. Not holding, not claiming, just present, available, close enough to be real. Pharaoh's fingers curled, very slightly, toward that warmth, and stayed there. 20 minutes passed, then 30. No doctor came through the restricted access doors. No nurse returned with a follow-up or a form or even a nod in their direction. The lobby kept doing what the lobby had been doing all afternoon, running its indifferent hum of motion, phones ringing, wheels squeaking, voices overlapping, while the three boys and the man in the suit sat in the plastic chairs like they'd been left there by a world that had moved on without them. Pharaoh had fallen asleep. It happened the way it happens with small children who have run completely out of resources, not gradually, not with warning, but completely and suddenly. 1 minute he was sitting upright with both hands gripping the armrests. The next he was gone, his head resting against Ezekiel's arm, his breathing slow and even and deep. Sleep was the only place he could go where none of this was happening. Ezekiel sat very still and let him. Every 3 or 4 minutes, Ezekiel's eyes moved, Not deliberately, just automatically, the way certain habits work, to the bruise on Pharaoh's arm. The one exposed below the edge of his sleeve. He'd look at it. Then look away. Then look back again. He wasn't doing it on purpose. It was something his eyes did on their own, the way a tongue finds a cut in the mouth over and over without being directed to. Caius noticed. He noticed and he said nothing. Malachi had started talking. He didn't announce it. He didn't turn toward Caius or make it a conversation. He just started talking the way people talk when they've held something too long and the container for it has finally gotten full. Low, steady, aimed at nothing in particular. The words fell into the air between them. She gets headaches, Malachi said. Bad ones. Behind her left eye, mostly. She doesn't tell us when they're happening, but we know. The way she holds the side of her face, like she's trying to keep pressure on it. She takes these white pills, the small ones, but they make her tired afterward. She tries to take them after we're already in bed at night, so we won't see her slow down. He paused. The pause was not dramatic. It was the pause of someone telling the truth at their own pace. She doesn't want us to worry about her. Caius didn't respond. He'd learned, over the course of a long career and a longer life, that some people did not need a response. They needed a witness. Someone to receive the words and hold them with enough care that the telling of them felt worth the cost. She got a job at the laundry place on Hewitt Avenue, Malachi continued. Starts at 6 in the morning. Gets back around 2. She'd come home and make us lunch even when she was dead tired. Every day, even the hard ones. She never... A pause. Something shifted in his face. Not breaking, just acknowledging the weight. She never missed. Not once. The fluorescent lights hummed. The phone at the reception desk rang twice and stopped. The headaches got worse the last few weeks. We told her to take a day off, but she wouldn't listen. She said we needed the money for winter coats. The good kind, the ones with the thick lining. He said it without irony, without resentment. Just as fact. Pharaoh's was too small from last year. She said she'd get him one before it got cold. A 7-year-old. Explaining that we needed the money for winter coats. Caius looked at Malachi's profile. The clean line of his jaw, the dark eyes aimed at nothing, the absolute composure of a child who had been required to be composure long before he was ready. We found her on the kitchen floor, Malachi said. His voice stayed the same. The same, even, deliberate register it had been in the whole time. Pharaoh thought she was sleeping. He went and got a blanket to put on her. A breath. I knew she wasn't sleeping. He didn't say what happened after that. He didn't need to. The image was complete. A boy who knew. A younger brother bringing a blanket. The moment of recognition that split a childhood in two before and after. Around them, the hospital moved on its ordinary tracks. An orderly passed with a cart. A visitor asked the reception desk for the 3rd floor. Someone somewhere dropped something metal and the sound rang out and faded. The indifference of the place was not hostile. That was the thing that made it so impossible to fight. Hostility you could push against. This was just neutrality. Routine. 3 children in a lobby was a procedural matter, a documentation item, a box to be checked in the appropriate order. It was not, statistically, an emergency. Caius looked at the elevator at the far end of the lobby. 3rd floor. His meeting had been running for 38 minutes without him. 12 people around a table that had been booked for months. A decision that a dozen departments had been waiting on. His assistant had texted twice and called once. He looked at the elevator, then looked at Malachi, then looked at the elevator again. Something in his expression settled. Not dramatically. Not with the look of someone deciding to do something noble. Just the quiet interior shift of a man who had identified what actually mattered in a given moment and had chosen it over what was merely expected. He pulled out his phone, typed 3 sentences to his assistant. Read them over once. Sent them. Put the phone away. Malachi was still watching Pharaoh sleep. The rise and fall of the small chest. The loose curl of the hand on the armrest. He hadn't seen Caius look at the elevator. But Ezekiel had. Ezekiel, still quiet, the one who noticed everything and said the least, had been watching Caius Aldridge with the steady, measuring attention of a child who had learned that what adults do with the moment of choice tells you more about them than anything they've ever said. He'd watched Caius look at the elevator, and watched him put the phone away, and said nothing. But something changed in Ezekiel's face. Something so small it barely registered. Something that looked, for just a moment, like the beginning of a decision being unmade. Caius stood up. "I'll be back in 5 minutes," he said, directed at Ezekiel. "No fuss. No explanation." He said it the way you say things you mean. He was back in 4. He came back with 3 bags from the vending alcove at the end of the hall, crackers, juice boxes with the little straw sleeves still on, a granola bar, 2 packages of peanut butter crackers, a small bag of pretzels. He'd bought a protein bar for himself without thinking about it, and then, when he sat back down, set it in front of Malachi instead. Malachi looked at the bar. Looked at Caius. The look wasn't suspicious exactly. It was the more complicated version of suspicious. The look of a child who has wanted something and been burned by wanting it and has developed a layer of assessment between the wanting and the reaching. "I didn't put anything in it," Caius said. "A beat. The quiet kind." Then Malachi picked up the bar. Peeled back the wrapper with the same deliberate care he did everything. Took a slow, measured bite. Chewed. Said nothing. Pharaoh woke up when the apple juice got close enough to smell. He surfaced from sleep in stages. First the stillness breaking, then the eyes opening halfway, then the slow blinking of a child finding his bearings. There was 1 second, just one, before memory came back. His face had the pure, unguarded softness of a person who has forgotten where they are. No weight in it. No bracing. Then it came back. The lobby. The doors. The word stable said flat and fast. His face closed back up. But he reached for the juice box. Caius handed it to him. Said nothing. Pharaoh took it with both hands, bit the straw sleeve off, pressed it in with his thumbs, and drank. Long, slow pull. I strayed ahead. The 4 of them sat in a row in the plastic chairs and ate without speaking. The lobby moved around them, the regular traffic of a hospital afternoon, people coming and going, the overhead page system calling names into the air, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. None of it touched them. They were in their own small climate, the 4 of them, with their crackers and their juice boxes and the warm lobby light coming through the windows going from gold to amber as the afternoon got later. Ezekiel finished his crackers. He folded the empty wrapper into a small square. Precise. Methodical. He aligned the corners before each fold. It took him longer than it needed to, and Caius could see it for what it was, the management of a thing that could be controlled in a day where almost nothing could be. Then Ezekiel looked at him. "Why are you still here?" The question had no challenge in it. No accusation. It was genuine in the way children's questions are when they haven't yet learned to dress their curiosity in social courtesy. He wanted to know. He was asking. Caius thought about it. Not for performance. He actually thought about it. Turned the question over, looked at the honest answer, considered it. "I'm not sure yet," he said. Ezekiel considered that. His head tilted slightly to one side. "That's honest." "Yeah. Most people just say they want to help. And then they leave," Caius said. Ezekiel looked at him steadily. "And then they leave," he confirmed. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that happens when 2 people have understood something about each other and are letting it breathe. Pharaoh, without announcing it, leaned sideways. Just slightly. His right shoulder pressed gently against Caius's left arm. Not seeking permission. Not making a declaration. Just leaning the way a person leans when the thing beside them is warm and still and has not moved away. Caius stayed exactly where he was. Malachi had returned to watching the restricted access doors. He developed a rhythm. A slow, private rhythm of eating and watching and eating, small methodical bites and long steady looks at the sealed doors at the end of the hall. Like he was keeping a vigil. Like he was the only thing standing between his mother and whatever came next, and he knew it and had accepted the weight of it. The afternoon light through the lobby windows changed color again. The long horizontal light of late afternoon, the kind that made everything look slightly more than real. Ezekiel talked some. He was the one who talked. Not compulsively, not to fill silence, but with the careful, chosen quality of someone who valued words and didn't waste them. He talked about their apartment on the 4th floor of a building with an elevator that only worked half the time. He talked about a fish named Octavius, a blue betta fish their mother had gotten from a street sale for $2 and named Octavius because she'd written it out on a notepad and held it up and then pointed at the fish and nodded, satisfied, like the name was correct and obvious. He talked about the notes. She leaves us notes on the refrigerator, he said. Every morning before we wake up. Little square pieces of paper. She draws pictures on them instead of words sometimes. A sun if it's going to be a good day. A little house if we're supposed to come straight home after school. A heart if she just... He stopped. Started again more carefully. If she just wants us to know. Even when things were hard? Caius asked. Especially then, Ezekiel said. She never put the bad stuff in the notes. The notes were always... He searched for the word. Safe. Even when she wasn't, Caius thought. Yeah, Ezekiel said, as if he'd heard it. Even when she wasn't. Pharaoh had his knee touching Caius's knee now. Still not looking at him. Eyes forward. But the contact was there, deliberate, maintained, the small physical claim of a child deciding, in the only language he currently had available, that this particular presence was allowed. Caius's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Something happened to his face. Quick, controlled. But there, a tightening around the eyes, a shift in the jaw, the expression of a man who has received information that requires a response he is not ready to give in front of people. He looked at the screen for 3 seconds, then locked the phone and set it face down on his knee. Malachi had caught it. He watched Caius look at the phone and watched the phone go face down and watched Caius settle back into stillness. And the watching was thorough and careful in the way of someone who had spent years reading the small signals that adults thought they were hiding. Do you have to go? Malachi asked. The question was direct. Not soft. Not trying to make it easy. Caius looked at him. Full on. No deflection. Not yet, he said. Malachi held his eyes for a moment past the natural end of the exchange. Looking for the qualifier. The but. The however, I do have to go eventually. The careful exit being prepared somewhere underneath the words. He didn't find it. Not this time. The lobby lights came on overhead as the daylight through the windows finally gave up. Fluorescent and flat and reaching into all the corners. The boys stayed. Caius stayed. The phone buzzed again, face down on his knee. Then again. He left it there. Outside the restricted access doors at the end of the long hall. Nothing moved. Nothing opened. The silence behind them held. But something else was coming. The kind of thing that doesn't knock. Which of the 3 boys do you relate to the most? Malachi, who holds everything together, Ezekiel, who watches and chooses his words, or Pharaoh, who shows what he feels without saying a word? Drop it in the comments. He was gone. Just like that. No warning. No explanation. No note left at the desk. No message passed through a nurse. No word sent through anyone. The chair where Caius Aldridge had sat for 3 consecutive afternoons was empty. The 4th afternoon it was still empty. The 5th the same. The boys came back to the hospital every day after school because there was nowhere else to go. Their mother was still behind the restricted access doors, still stabilizing, still unreachable in the way of someone who was present but not yet returned. They came back and they sat in the same plastic chairs in the same corner of the lobby. Same row. Same order, Malachi on the end, then Ezekiel, then Pharaoh pressed against the wall. The chair beside Pharaoh stayed empty. Pharaoh kept looking at it. Not constantly, not in a way that announced itself. But the way his eyes drifted there, 2, 3, 4 times an hour, was the way eyes move toward a thing they're still waiting to understand. On the second day, Ezekiel moved one seat to the left so there was space on his right. Like he was saving it. He didn't say that's what he was doing. He didn't say anything about it at all. But the seat stayed open, between him and the next stranger, just in case. By the third day, Malachi had stopped looking at the elevator. That was the thing you noticed if you were paying attention. He'd spent the first 3 days with his eyes alternating between the restricted access doors and the elevator, watching both, keeping track of both. The doors for his mother, the elevator for the man. On the third day of the empty chair, he stopped watching the elevator. He watched only the doors. Pharaoh had stopped eating well. Not dramatically, not in a way that set off alarms. He still ate what was in front of him. He just did it the way people eat when food has stopped being something they're interested in and started being something they're getting through. Small bites. Long pauses between them. His eyes somewhere else entirely. At night, back in the apartment, their neighbor Mrs. Calloway staying over to keep things official, Pharaoh had started sleeping with both arms wrapped around himself. Not a new habit. The return of an old one. Ezekiel recognized it. He'd seen it before, in the worst months before things had stabilized at home. The arms around himself like he was the only thing available to hold on to. That mattered. Pause on that. A child sleeping like that, wrapping himself up because he had briefly felt the opposite. Felt something hold him. And then it was gone. Ezekiel lay awake in the dark and stared at the ceiling and said nothing. That was how Ezekiel processed things. In silence. In the dark. With his eyes open and his hands flat and his mind moving over the problem from every angle until he'd identified what was true and what was story and what was the actual thing underneath both. What was true? The man had come. The man had stayed. The man had gone. What was story? Maybe he'd had a reason. Maybe something had happened. Maybe he'd had to leave in a way that wasn't about them. What was the actual thing underneath? It didn't matter why. What mattered was the result. What mattered was Pharaoh's arms wrapped around himself in the dark. Malachi said it on the 5th day. They were sitting in the lobby. The chair was empty. The fluorescent lights were doing their flat, indifferent work overhead. Malachi said it quietly, not to either of them specifically, more to the air the way he'd talked to Caius. Like the words needed somewhere to land and the air next to his brothers was the closest available place. Will he come back? Ezekiel didn't answer right away, because he didn't know. And Ezekiel didn't say things he didn't know as if he did. That was a rule he'd made for himself a long time ago. You didn't promise things you couldn't keep. You didn't say the word safe unless you meant it. Pharaoh's hands were in his lap, small and still. The lobby moved around them. The phone at the reception desk rang and was answered, and the conversation was someone else's entirely, and the world kept running on its track. And the chair beside Pharaoh stayed empty, and nobody came through the doors with a reason. And that particular silence, the silence of waiting for something that may not be coming, settled into all 3 boys like cold water finding its level. It was the heaviest kind of hope. The kind that hurts because it refuses to fully become something else. They came on a Thursday, 2 of them, a woman in a gray blazer carrying a tan folder thick with papers, and a man behind her with a lanyard and a badge and the particular walk of someone who had done this many times and had stopped noticing what it looked like from the other side. They walked into the lobby and looked around and found the boys, and the way they walked toward them, purposeful, direct, without the softness of people who understood what they were walking toward, made Malachi's stomach go cold before a single word had been spoken. He stood up. "Malachi Delaney?" the woman said. "Yes. I'm with the Department of Child and Family Services." She said it the way you state a fact about geography. Here is where I am from. Here is what I represent. We've been asked to assess the current care situation for you and your brothers while your mother is receiving treatment. Ezekiel had gone still. Pharaoh had moved, without looking, without deciding, purely by instinct, so that he was standing directly behind Malachi with both hands gripping the back of Malachi's shirt. "We're fine," Malachi said. "I understand that." The woman's voice was not unkind. That was almost worse. Unkind you could push against. This was the voice of someone who had separated their feelings from their function so completely that there was nothing to grip. But the hospital is required to report when minors are present without a legal guardian on premises for an extended period. This is just a conversation. Just a conversation. Malachi knew what just a conversation meant. He'd heard those words before in different rooms from different adults with different folders. Just a conversation meant the conversation was already decided. The folder was already full. The decision was somewhere in those papers, and the conversation was the part where they told you about it. He looked at the man behind her. The man with the lanyard had a pen in his hand and a yellow legal pad and was looking at the boys with the careful, neutral expression of someone taking inventory. "Where are we going?" Pharaoh said. His voice came from behind Malachi's shoulder. Small. Direct. "Nobody's going anywhere right now," the woman said. "We're just going to sit down and talk." "That's not what that folder means," Ezekiel said. The woman looked at him. Something shifted in her face, just slightly, just for a second. The way a person looks when a child says something that lands more squarely than expected. She recovered. Kept her voice even. "Why don't we all find somewhere to sit?" "No." That was Malachi. One word. Flat and final. The lobby had gone, somehow quieter. The ambient sounds were still there, the phones, the wheels, the overhead page. But there was a quality to the air around this particular group of people, this cluster of 3 boys and 2 officials in the corner of the lobby, that had drawn a perimeter around itself. The man with the lanyard shifted his weight, clicked his pen, looked toward the reception desk like he was calculating something. Malachi's hands had gone to his sides. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't loud. He was 7 years old, and he was standing between his brothers and 2 adults with a folder, and he was not moving. Pharaoh's grip on his shirt tightened. Ezekiel stepped up beside Malachi, shoulder to shoulder, not saying anything, just present, just there. The woman in the gray blazer opened the folder, and then a sound, not loud, not dramatic, footsteps, coming from the direction of the elevator, measured, deliberate, the footsteps of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had made up their mind before they left wherever they came from. The woman looked up. The man with the lanyard turned. Caius Aldridge walked across the lobby like the lobby belonged to him. Dark suit. No phone in his hand this time. Eyes already on the social workers before they'd finished turning around. His face carried the expression of a man who had arrived exactly when he intended to. Not a minute early out of panic. Not a minute late out of indifference. Exactly when he meant to. The woman in the gray blazer looked at him. "And you are?" Caius looked at her, then at the folder, then back at her face. "I'm the person," he said, "you need to talk to." The woman's name was Doreen Hobbs. 22 years in Child Protective Services. She had seen every version of this. The relative who showed up with paperwork, the neighbor with good intentions and no legal standing, the stranger who thought caring was the same as authority. She had learned to hold firm through all of it because the folder in her hand existed for a reason, and that reason was the safety of 3 boys who currently had no verified adult in their lives. She looked at Caius Aldridge the way she looked at everyone who tried to insert themselves into the official process. She was prepared to be patient. She was not prepared for what came next. Caius reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a card. He handed it to Doreen Hobbs with the same economy of motion he did everything, No performance, no explanation before the explanation was needed. The card said Caius J. Aldrich. It said a title beneath that. It said a firm name beneath that. She read it. Read it again. The man with the lanyard leaned slightly to see. Caius let them look. He waited the way you wait when you know the room will need a moment to catch up and you're willing to give it that moment exactly. I've been in contact with hospital administration, Caius said. I've also been in contact with the children's mother, through a medical interpreter in writing this morning. She was alert enough to communicate. He paused. Let that land. She has designated interim guardianship in writing, pending legal formalization. The paperwork is with the hospital's legal office. You can verify it at the desk. Doreen Hobbs looked at him. Her pen stopped moving. That happened this morning? She said. 2 hours ago. She looked at the folder in her hand, at the papers inside it, at the careful bureaucratic architecture of a case that had, 2 hours ago, become significantly more complicated. The man with the lanyard had stopped taking notes. Caius looked past them then, past the blazer and the lanyard and the folder, and looked at the boys, at Malachi, who was still standing in the same position he'd been standing in when Caius walked in. Shoulders back, hands at his sides, chin level. A 7-year-old who had been holding a line all by himself for 15 minutes. At Ezekiel, shoulder to shoulder with his brother, watching Caius with an expression that was not relief yet. Not quite, but the look of someone calculating the distance between where they are and where safe might be, and finding that distance smaller than it was before. To Pharaoh, still behind Malachi's shoulder, grip still on the back of his brother's shirt. Pharaoh, who looked at Caius the moment Caius looked at him, and who did not let go of the shirt, but whose face, slowly, the way the sun comes from behind a cloud, changed. Caius held his gaze for a moment. Then he turned back to Doreen Hobbs. I understand you have a process, he said. I respect it. I'm not asking you to skip any part of it. I'm asking you to run it in the right order, which means verifying what I've told you before proceeding with any removal assessment. Doreen Hobbs was quiet for a moment that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Then she closed the folder. Not permanently. Not in the way of someone who had decided to walk away. In the way of someone who was putting one chapter of a process on hold in order to begin the verification chapter correctly. We'll need to confirm with the hospital's legal office, she said. Room 314, Caius said. I'll take you there. She looked at him, measured, assessing. Then something in her posture shifted, just slightly, just the degree that a professional shifts when they've identified that the person across from them is working within the rules, not against them. Fine, she said. She turned and walked toward the elevator. The man with the lanyard followed. Their footsteps faded across the linoleum. The lobby returned to its ordinary hum. Caius stood where he was. The 3 boys stood where they were. Nobody moved for a full breath. Then Pharaoh let go of Malachi's shirt. He walked forward, not running, just walking, direct and certain. And he stopped in front of Caius and looked up at him with those dark, precise eyes that had been watching and measuring and waiting for something they couldn't name. He didn't say anything. He wrapped both arms around Caius's waist and pressed his face into the dark jacket. Caius stood completely still for 1 second. Then his arms came down, slowly, carefully, like something that had been decided very quietly, and held. Ezekiel exhaled. Long and slow and full, the exhale of someone who had been holding their breath for days. Malachi didn't move, but his hands, which had been balled tight at his sides since the social workers walked in, opened. Slowly, finger by finger. The journal was green, small and battered, the corners soft from handling, the cover worn down to the cardboard beneath the fabric in 2 spots. Pharaoh found it in the bottom of the bag their neighbor Mrs. Calloway had packed for their mother when the ambulance came. A bag that had been sitting untouched in the corner of the hospital room since the first day. because no one had thought to go through it, and because the boys had not been allowed back to the room until now. Their mother was awake. Not fully. Not in the way of someone who had come all the way back to the surface. She was somewhere between. Eyes open, tracking, responding to their faces with the small movements that were her language when she had nothing else available. A hand squeeze for yes. Press of lips for I'm here. A slow blink that meant something only they knew how to read. Malachi sat on her left side and held her hand and didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He'd been talking for both of them for years, to teachers, to landlords, to the woman at the county office. But in this room, with her hand in his, the talking could stop. He could just be 7. Just be her son. Just sit there with the knowledge that she was breathing and let that be enough. Ezekiel sat at the foot of the bed and kept watch the way he always kept watch. Quietly, comprehensively. His eyes moved over the machines, the tubes, the steady green lines on the monitor, cataloging all of it with the same careful attention he gave everything. Not because he knew what it meant. Because knowing what was there made him feel less like the ground could disappear. Pharaoh was the one going through the bag. He'd been given permission. Caius had asked one of the nurses and she'd said it was fine. The belongings were theirs, it was all right. So Pharaoh sat cross-legged on the floor beside the window and went through the bag with the same methodical care his brother used to fold wrappers. Each item handled, looked at, set aside. A change of clothes. A phone charger. A small wallet. 2 pens. Pack of mints. A folded-up piece of paper with a phone number on it in their mother's handwriting. Careful, round. The handwriting of someone who took her time with letters because letters were all she had. And then the journal. He turned it over in his hands. The cover had no title. No name. Just the worn green fabric and the soft corners and the sense of something that had been carried for a long time. He opened it to the first page. And what he found there, the words, the drawings, the small square sketches in the margins, it stopped him completely. He sat very still with the journal open in his lap. After a moment he said, "Mama wrote things down. Nobody had known that." Ezekiel looked up. Malachi's eyes moved to his brother on the floor. "A lot of things," Pharaoh said. His voice was careful, like he was carrying something fragile. He turned a page. On the bed, their mother's hand moved. The slow, intentional movement of someone with limited energy directing all of it toward one action. Her fingers found Malachi's, squeezed, then released and moved, reached out toward the direction of Pharaoh, toward the floor, toward the journal. Not grabbing, just pointing, as if to say, yes, that, you were always supposed to find that. Pharaoh looked up from the page. His mother looked back at him, and the expression on her face, exhausted, reduced, stripped of everything that wasn't essential, was the same expression that had been in those morning notes for years. The sun when it was going to be a good day. The heart when she just wanted them to know. Even here. Even now. Still her. Caius stood in the doorway of the room. He hadn't come in. He'd stayed at the threshold, giving the space to them, understanding without being told that this particular room and this particular moment belonged to the 4 of them, and he was not part of the 4 yet. He watched Pharaoh hold the journal. He watched Malachi hold his mother's hand. He watched Ezekiel watching everything. And he thought about the room he'd grown up in. The silences in that room. The things that had never been written down, never been kept, never been left for him to find. He thought about how different a childhood looked when someone fought to leave a record of the love in it. Even without words, even in drawings, even in small square notes on a refrigerator that said nothing except, "I was here, and you mattered, and I did not forget." He leaned against the doorframe. Pharaoh turned to the next page of the journal. And whatever he read there, his face changed in a way that was too big and too complex for the dim hospital room to contain. He looked up. Not at his brothers. To Caius. Pharaoh held the journal out. He didn't explain it. He didn't say what page it was or what the words meant or what his mother had written there. He just held it out, arm extended, open, the way you hand someone something you've decided they're allowed to have. Caius came into the room. He crossed to where Pharaoh was sitting on the floor and he lowered himself down, knees on the linoleum, eye level with the boy, and he took the journal. He read. The room was quiet. The machines kept their steady record of a woman's heart beating. Outside the window, the city made its ordinary sounds. Traffic, wind, the distant compress of living, and none of it entered the room. Caius read what Renata Delaney had written. It was not long. Half a page, written in the same careful round letters as the phone number in the wallet, the kind of writing that belonged to someone who had learned to make each word do the work of several. She had written it based on the date in the upper corner on a Tuesday night 11 days before she collapsed. After the headaches had gotten bad. After the white pills had stopped working as well as they used to. After she had spent enough nights staring at the ceiling to know that she needed to write something down in case the ceiling ever won. She had written about the boys. Of course she had. She had written what each of them was. Not their qualities in the way a form asks for qualities. Not height and weight and school grade, but what they were, what they carried. What she saw in them that she was afraid the world would miss if she wasn't there to point at it. She had written about Malachi. He already knows how to hold things. Teach him that he doesn't always have to. She had written about Ezekiel. He understands more than he says. Make sure someone asks what he thinks. She had written about Pharaoh. He still feels everything out loud. Please don't let anyone teach him to stop. And at the bottom, in a line separated from the rest by a small space, she had written, if someone is reading this and it isn't me, take care of them the way I would have. Not perfectly, just honestly. That's all I ever did. Caius read it twice. Then he closed the journal carefully, held it for a moment, then set it on the floor beside Pharaoh with the same care you use with something that belongs to someone. He looked at Pharaoh. Pharaoh was watching him. She wrote that for you, Pharaoh said. She didn't know you yet, but she wrote it for you. Caius didn't answer that directly. He looked over at the bed, at Renata Delaney. Eyes open, tracking, present in the way she was always present even when the rest of her couldn't keep up. She was looking at him, had been looking at him since he came fully into the room. He held her gaze. He nodded. Once. Direct. The nod of someone making a commitment in the only language the moment offered. Her eyes closed slowly. Not in sleep. In the way of someone who has received the answer they were waiting for and can finally stop holding themselves open for it. Malachi was watching from his chair beside the bed. He had the expression of someone who had been standing guard at a door for a very long time and was now, carefully, not all at once, beginning to consider that it might be safe to step back. Just slightly, just enough to breathe. He looked at Caius. He said, "You came back." Not a question, not an accusation, just a fact being stated out loud so that it could become real, so that it could be something that had been said and heard and could not be unsaid. "I came back," Caius said. Ezekiel, from the foot of the bed, said nothing. But he was smiling. Small and quiet and not entirely certain of itself. The smile of someone who has decided to allow something they were afraid to want. The room held all of them. The machines kept their count. The light through the window had shifted to the late afternoon gold that made everything look like something worth keeping. Pharaoh leaned back against Caius's arm and stayed there. Malachi kept his mother's hand. Ezekiel kept his watch. And for the first time in a very long time, possibly the first time in their lives, the silence in the room was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of enough. It was not the end of hard things. Hard things were still coming. They would come in the forms they always came in, paperwork and processes, cold mornings and tight money, days when the weight of everything pressed down without warning. Renata Delaney still had a long road. The boys still had questions they didn't have words for yet. Caius Aldridge still had a life that had not anticipated any of this, and the work of rearranging it around something that mattered more was not simple work. None of that was resolved. But in this room right now, with the machines keeping count and the late light coming through the glass, 3 boys who had learned too early that love sometimes leaves had someone who had chosen, deliberately and without guarantee, to stay. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. The journal sat on the floor beside Pharaoh. The city outside kept moving. And Renata Delaney, eyes closed now, breathed slowly and evenly. The breathing of someone who has finally put something down that was too heavy to carry alone. Outside, the world still had sharp edges. It always would. But something had changed in the room on the 4th floor of a hospital in the middle of an ordinary week in an ordinary city. Something quiet and complete and permanent. And no one needed to say what it was. They already knew. If the story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Every week we bring you stories about real human strength, quiet love, and the people who show up when it counts. Drop a comment and tell us, what part of the story hit you the hardest? Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that broken beginnings do not decide where a story ends.